The luxurious mansion stood tall amidst the rolling hills of the upscale New York neighborhood. The towering walls, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers were symbols of wealth and status. The Morgan residence was everything the world associated with success, power, and privilege. Richard Morgan, the patriarch of the household, had it all: wealth, a family, a thriving business empire. But despite all this, he felt a void deep within him. Richard sat at his mahogany desk, his fingers tracing the edge of a contract, his mind elsewhere. The numbers and figures danced before his eyes, yet he could not focus on them. The grand house, with sprawling gardens and exquisite design, felt hollow. The truth was that Richard's life had become a routine, a daily grind of meetings, deals, and hollow interactions. He was surrounded by luxury, but happiness had long eluded him. He had spent his life building his empire, ensuring that no one would ever question his success. His father's legacy weighed heavily on him, as did the expectations placed on him from childhood. But what had it all amounted to? A perfectly crafted facade. He had no real connection to the people around him. His family was distant, his marriage had lost its spark, and even the joy of his children seemed distant, as if it were all part of a performance that never quite felt real. His wife, Caroline, was a beautiful woman, but her life had become just as businesslike as his own. They rarely spoke about anything that mattered, only about the logistics of running a household or the next investment opportunity. The spark that had once existed between them had fizzled out long ago, replaced by silence and polite gestures. Caroline was upstairs in her room, spending hours on end scrolling through social media, attending to her appearance, and keeping up with her friends. Richard had long since stopped trying to connect with her emotionally. The love they once shared was now a distant memory, replaced by routine and obligation. But Richard's focus was elsewhere. For some reason, he found himself drawn to the women who worked in his home, the staff who kept everything running smoothly, even if they were invisible to him in most moments. One such woman was Clara. Clara was not a stranger to hard work. She was a housemaid who had worked for the Morgan family for over 4 years, and though her job was often considered menial, she had a grace that transcended her role. She had started working for Richard when she had been a single mother with a young child, struggling to make ends meet. Richard had never taken much notice of her. To him, she was simply another cog in a machine that kept his home in perfect order. Clara was a 30-year-old woman of African descent, with deep brown skin that glowed in the soft light of the room she tended to. Her presence was commanding, not because of her size, but because of the way she carried herself. She was strong, proud, and dignified, despite her position as a maid. She had learned early on that survival meant keeping her head down and working hard, no matter what. Her son, James, was her world, and she worked tirelessly to give him a better life. She had never complained. She did her job with love and dedication, but she always kept a part of herself hidden. Her dreams, her aspirations, were tucked away in the corners of her heart. Richard had seen Clara around the house, of course, but he had never really looked at her. Not until the day he walked into the living room and saw her in a moment of complete vulnerability and tenderness. He had heard the soft sounds of laughter, the gentle hum of a lullaby, and the faint smell of baby powder. When he opened the door, he saw Clara sitting on the couch, cradling his daughter Emily in her arms, nursing her with a kind of love Richard had never witnessed before. Richard stood frozen in the doorway. There in front of him was a woman who had been a part of his life for years, yet he had never really seen her. But now, as she tenderly breastfed Emily, Richard realized that he had been blind to her humanity. Clara wasn't just a maid. She was a mother. She was someone who had given so much of herself to others, without expecting anything in return. In that moment, Richard understood something about Clara that he had never known. She was a woman who had sacrificed her own dreams for the sake of others. As Clara noticed Richard standing there, she quickly pulled away, startled by his presence. But Richard didn't react. He didn't scold her or send her away as he might have done in the past. Instead, he stood there, transfixed by the moment. He saw her eyes, soft, yet filled with a quiet strength. He saw the way she held Emily, her face full of devotion, and he felt something stir inside him, something that he had never felt before. Clara quickly stood up, awkwardly adjusting her uniform, her face flushed with embarrassment. But Richard's eyes remained fixed on her. He could no longer deny the truth. Clara was not just an employee. She was a woman who had shown him something he had long since lost. She had shown him the power of unconditional love. The house felt eerily quiet after that moment in the living room. Richard had retreated to his study, but his mind wasn't on the contracts or meetings that awaited him. It was on Clara, on the image of her sitting on the couch, nursing his daughter. His daughter, Emily. He had seen his daughter grow up in his care, but what he hadn't noticed until that moment was how deeply Clara had become a part of her life. It wasn't just about a maid tending to a child's needs. It was about the deep maternal bond that Clara had forged. And it was this bond, this tender act of love, that had shaken Richard to his core. His thoughts drifted to the hundreds of people he had passed in his life. Employees, assistants, even acquaintances. How many of them had he truly seen? How many had he really understood? The answer was simple: none. He had always been too focused on his empire, on his wealth, to truly see people for who they were. He had failed to recognize the humanity of those around him, those who made his life easier, those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to maintain the life he had built. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on a window that overlooked the city. The skyline glittered in the distance, but it seemed distant to him now. He had everything money could buy. He had cars, mansions, vacations, and exotic places. He had been surrounded by the best of everything, but none of it had ever brought him peace. None of it had ever filled the emptiness he had felt for so long. As the hours passed, Richard couldn't shake the image of Clara. Her face, filled with love and care for Emily, haunted him. There was something so real in that moment, so raw. Richard had been surrounded by fake smiles, plastic conversations, and material wealth, but Clara's love for his daughter was pure, untainted by the world of privilege that Richard had come to know. And for the first time, he realized how hollow his own life had become, how his pursuit of success had blinded him to the things that truly mattered. Richard couldn't help but wonder what life would be like if he had cared about the people who worked for him, if he had taken the time to understand them. He stood up abruptly, shaking his head as if trying to rid himself of the thoughts that were creeping into his mind. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and walked out of the study. He needed to clear his head, to understand what had been happening inside him. But the more he thought, the more it became clear. He had never really known anyone like Clara. He walked through the grand halls of his house, but this time, everything felt different. The polished floors, the grand staircase, the paintings on the walls, they all seemed so insignificant now. Richard's eyes scanned the house, as if he were seeing it for the first time. The life he had built felt fragile now, like a house of cards that could collapse with a single breath. He turned a corner and saw Clara again. She was in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the family. Her movements were fluid, graceful even, despite the exhaustion that must have weighed on her. Her eyes were focused on the task at hand, but there was an undeniable gentleness in her expression. She worked as if she belonged here, as if this home was just as much hers as it was Richard's. Clara glanced up when Richard entered the kitchen. She paused, a slight frown creasing her forehead, but she said nothing. Richard was about to turn around and leave when he stopped himself. This was the moment where everything could change. He stepped closer to her, and she straightened up, clearly surprised by his sudden presence. Clara had never been one to make eye contact with Richard for long. She had always maintained a respectful distance, never speaking unless spoken to, never stepping out of line. But today, Richard wanted more than just a polite exchange. He wanted to understand her, to see her. "How long have you been working here, Clara?" Richard asked, his voice softer than he intended. Clara hesitated, unsure where this conversation was heading. "For years, sir," she replied quietly, glancing down at her hands, which were busy slicing vegetables. Richard nodded, but he wasn't satisfied. There was more to Clara than just her years of service. "And how long have you been taking care of Emily?" he asked, trying to keep the question casual, but there was an urgency in his tone. Clara shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to being the subject of Richard's curiosity. In fact, it felt strange to her. She had always been a silent figure in the house, doing her job, keeping her head down and not expecting anything in return. But Richard's words felt different. There was a sincerity behind them, a genuine interest that she couldn't ignore. "I've been taking care of her since she was born," Clara said, her voice steady. "I didn't have a choice. I wanted to be here for her. I wanted to make sure she felt loved, even if it wasn't from her own mother." Richard's chest tightened as he heard those words. Clara had been there for Emily in ways that no one else had. She had filled a void that he hadn't even realized existed in his own family. Emily had a mother, but it was Clara who had truly given her the love and care she needed. Richard stared at Clara for a moment, his mind racing. He wanted to ask more questions, to dig deeper into her life, but he didn't know how to ask without crossing a line. Clara was not just his employee. She was a person, a mother, a woman with hopes and dreams of her own. And yet, for so long, Richard had only seen her as a part of the machinery of his household. For the first time, Richard realized that his wealth and power meant nothing. What mattered was connection. What mattered was truly understanding the people around him. And Clara, in her quiet way, had shown him more about love and sacrifice than anyone else ever had. Clara, still unaware of the transformation taking place in Richard's mind, continued with her work. But in her heart, she knew that something was changing. Something was different. She had always been invisible to him, and now, for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt seen. The days after Richard's quiet revelation passed by, but the weight of what he'd witnessed lingered in his mind. It wasn't a passing thought, or something he could easily shake off. The image of Clara, nursing his daughter with so much care, continued to haunt him. It made him question everything he had built, everything he had assumed about his life, his success, and his relationships. The more Richard reflected, the more he realized that Clara was not just a figure in the background. She was a person who had sacrificed so much, not only for her own family, but for his. Richard had never seen that before. He had never taken the time to understand what it truly meant to care for others. Richard spent hours walking through the house, feeling the emptiness of it all. He had everything, wealth, status, a family, but still, he felt a void. Clara's presence in his life had begun to fill that void. It wasn't that she had any intention to do so. It wasn't her responsibility. But in her quiet, selfless way, she had started to offer Richard a glimpse of something he had long ignored. The value of human connection, empathy, and care. That evening after dinner, Richard found himself walking into the kitchen again. He had been thinking about the conversation they had earlier, and something inside him urged him to talk to Clara once more. He didn't know what he wanted to say, but he felt compelled to acknowledge her, to truly see her. As he entered, Clara was busy washing the dishes. Her back was turned to him, and for a moment, Richard hesitated. There was something in his chest that felt unfamiliar, vulnerability, maybe even guilt. He had always prided himself on being in control of everything, but in Clara's presence he felt small, unsure, and exposed. He cleared his throat softly, and Clara turned, startled by his approach. "You've been working here for a long time," Richard said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, something unexpected. Clara set the dish in her hand down and wiped her hands on the towel. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice calm, though there was a flicker of nervousness in her eyes. She had never known how to respond to Richard in these moments, when his words seemed to carry weight. She was used to him giving orders or discussing business, but this was different. "I've been thinking," Richard continued. He paused for a moment, struggling to find the right words. "I know I've never really taken the time to understand you, to see you for who you truly are, but I want to change that. I want to help you, Clara." Clara blinked, clearly surprised by his words. She had always known her place in this house. She had always known what was expected of her. Do the work, be silent, and be grateful for the opportunity. But this was different. Richard's tone was softer, more vulnerable. It wasn't like him to offer help without any expectation in return, and Clara didn't know how to respond. Richard noticed her hesitation. "I know you didn't ask for anything, Clara, but I want to offer you something real. You've given so much of yourself to my family, and I feel like it's time for me to do something for you. You've worked so hard, and I want to make sure you have the chance to pursue your own dreams." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She had worked her whole life, giving everything for her son and others, never asking for anything in return. She had never thought about her own dreams. Her job had always been a means to an end. But now, Richard was offering her something she had never even dared to dream of. A chance at something more. "You've been so good to my family," Richard said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I've seen that. You're not just an employee here. You're family, and I want to treat you as such." Clara struggled to find the right words. She had always been self-sufficient, never relying on anyone. She had never expected this kind of gesture from anyone, let alone Richard. "I'm not sure what to say," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't used to being spoken to in this way, especially by someone like Richard. It was as though her entire life had been spent serving others without a second thought for herself. And now, here was this man, rich, powerful, distant, offering her the chance to change her life. "You don't have to say anything right now," Richard replied, "but I want you to think about it. You deserve more than what you have now. You deserve a future where you can be in control of your life, where you can pursue your dreams without worry." Richard paused, letting his words sink in. He had never been this vulnerable, never spoken so openly to anyone in his life. But Clara had made him realize that there was more to life than wealth and success. There was connection, empathy, and love. And these were the things he had ignored for so long. Clara didn't know what to say. She felt overwhelmed by the offer, unsure of what it would mean for her life. But a part of her knew that this was a turning point. Richard had given her an opportunity she had never dreamed of. "I'll think about it," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. As Clara turned back to finish her task, Richard stood there for a moment, watching her. He had no idea where this conversation would lead, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't go back to the way things were. He couldn't continue living in the bubble he had created for himself, disconnected from the world around him. He had to make a change. And it all started with Clara. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara. Richard's words from that evening echoed in her mind, reverberating through every quiet moment. She couldn't stop thinking about what it said, about the possibility of something more than just a life of service and hard work. For the first time in her life, she was faced with a choice that could change everything. She had always been the kind of person who took things one day at a time. She had learned early on that survival didn't leave much room for dreaming. Her sole focus had been to work hard and provide for her son, James, who was the center of her world. But now, Richard offered her something she had never dared to dream about. A chance to pursue something more than just a job. A chance at a future that was hers to shape. Clara found herself sitting in her small room late at night, staring out the window. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. She had always loved the quiet of the night, the stillness that allowed her thoughts to drift freely. But tonight, her mind was racing. She had always been so focused on survival, on getting by, that she had never thought about what she wanted for herself. What did she want? What kind of life did she dream of? Her fingers traced the edges of the worn-out photograph on the bedside table. It was a picture of her son, James, when he was just a baby, his tiny fingers curled around hers. She had worked so hard to give him a better life, to make sure he had every opportunity she never had. But now, as she sat there in the quiet of the night, she wondered if there was more she could do for herself, for her son, and for the future. Clara had never been one to take risks. She had always played it safe, sticking to what she knew. But Richard's offer had shaken something loose in her, a part of her that had long been buried. A part of her that wanted to believe that she could be more than just a maid, more than just a caretaker for someone else's family. She closed her eyes and pictured herself in a different life. One where she wasn't constantly working to survive, but instead working to build something for herself. She imagined going back to school, earning a degree, and maybe one day starting her own business. She imagined a life where she wasn't defined by the job she did, but by who she was, a strong, capable woman with dreams and ambitions of her own. But then, a wave of doubt washed over her. Could she really do it? Could she take that step? It was so much easier to stay in her comfort zone, to keep doing what she knew, to keep working in the only job that had ever given her stability. And yet, Richard had seen something in her. He had seen her potential, even when she couldn't see it herself. He had offered her a chance, a lifeline that could pull her out of the cycle of struggle she had lived in for so long. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Clara quickly wiped her eyes, not realizing that she had been crying. She stood up and opened the door to find Richard standing in the hallway, his expression soft but determined. "I wanted to check on you," Richard said, his voice gentle. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to proceed. "I know this is a big decision, but I want you to know that there is no pressure. I just want you to have the opportunity to choose a different life, if that's what you want." Clara didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. Richard's words were kind, but there was a weight to them, a responsibility she had never expected. "Richard, I don't know if I can do this," she finally said, her voice shaky. "I've never had the chance to think about my future. All I've ever done is work, take care of others, and make sure my son is okay. I've never thought about myself before." Richard stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You deserve to think about yourself, Clara. You deserve more than this life of constant struggle. And I'm offering you the chance to have something better. But the choice is yours." Clara swallowed hard, the lump in her throat growing. She had always been the one to sacrifice, to give everything for the sake of others. And now, Richard was offering her something that felt almost too good to be true. But deep down, she knew that this could be her chance to change her life. And, in turn, change her son's future. "What if I fail?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if I try and it doesn't work out?" Richard's expression softened. "Clara, failure is part of life. But not trying, that's the real failure. You have the potential to do something amazing. You just need to believe in yourself." Clara looked down at the floor, her hands trembling. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she could be more than what she had always been. But it was so hard to let go of the life she had known, the life of security and certainty, even if it was a life of struggle. "I'll think about it," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Richard's words had planted a seed in her heart. And for the first time in a long time, she could imagine a future that wasn't defined by her circumstances. Richard gave her a small, understanding smile. "Take your time, Clara. But remember, you're not alone in this. Whatever you decide, I'm here to support you." As Richard turned to leave, Clara stood in the doorway, her mind swirling with possibilities. Could she really change her life? Could she take that first step towards something better? She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she felt a spark of hope, a hope that had been buried for so long. The days that followed were filled with tension and reflection for Clara. She spent countless hours thinking about Richard's offer, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. She found herself torn between the life she had always known and the uncertain future that Richard had promised. It was difficult to let go of the familiar, even if the familiar was a life of exhaustion and unfulfilled dreams. Clara's thoughts were often interrupted by the demands of her work. She had responsibilities to uphold, children to take care of, and her own life to maintain. But amidst all the chaos of her day-to-day routine, the offer Richard had made stood like a beacon in the distance, shining brightly, yet impossibly far away. That evening, as the sun began to set, Clara stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was a comforting distraction. But as she worked, her mind wandered back to Richard's words, to his offer that felt almost too good to be true. A part of her wanted to dismiss it, just go back to the way things were, keep her head down, and focus on what she had always known. She could continue working here, caring for Emily and the other children, without ever risking the chance of failure. It was safe. But there was another part of her, a part that had been dormant for so long, that was eager for change. That part of her wanted to take a leap, to step into a life that she had never thought possible. As she stood there in the kitchen, lost in her thoughts, Richard entered the room, as if on cue. Clara straightened up at the sight of him, surprised by his sudden appearance. She had been so preoccupied with her own thoughts that she hadn't even heard him approach. "I didn't mean to interrupt," Richard said, his voice soft but purposeful. "I know I've been pushing this a bit, but I wanted to check in. Have you had time to think about my offer?" Clara hesitated, unsure of what to say. Her mind was still spinning, still grappling with the enormity of the decision she had to make. Richard had given her a chance, an opportunity to change her life, but the fear of the unknown made it hard to take that first step. I've been thinking about it a lot," Clara finally said, her voice quiet. She turned to face him, her hand still gripping the knife tightly. "I'm just not sure if I'm ready for something like this. I've always worked hard for what I have, and the idea of giving up everything to pursue something else, it feels like a risk I'm not sure I can take." Richard stepped closer, his gaze steady and kind. "Clara, I understand your fear. But let me ask you this. What's the worst that can happen if you try? What do you have to lose by giving yourself a chance?" Clara glanced down at the vegetables she was chopping, the blade cutting through them almost methodically. She didn't know what to say. The fear of failure gnawed at her, a constant reminder of the many times she had struggled just to make ends meet. But there was also something else, something that Richard had awakened in her, a quiet hope. A hope that she could be more, that she could achieve something greater than she ever imagined. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Clara whispered, the weight of her doubts pulling at her. "I've always done what I had to do to survive, but I've never had the luxury of thinking about my future. My son, he's my priority. I can't just walk away from everything for a chance that might not even work out." Richard nodded, understanding the depth of her concerns. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation that gripped her. But he also saw something else, a spark, a glimmer of possibility. "Clara, you are stronger than you realize. You've been through so much already. You worked hard, raised your son, and shown a strength that few people can even comprehend. This is not about abandoning your son or your responsibilities. It's about giving yourself the chance to grow, to have a life where you can be proud of who you are, not just what you do." Clara's chest tightened as she listened to Richard's words. She wanted to believe him, to believe that she was capable of something more. But the fear of failure, the fear of stepping into the unknown, kept her from fully embracing the opportunity in front of her. Richard, seeing her internal struggle, stepped even closer, his voice lowering. "Clara, I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. I'm not asking you to jump into something you're not ready for. But I want you to know that you are not alone in this. Whatever you choose, I'll be here to support you." Clara's heart beat faster, a mix of emotions rushing through her. She had never had someone offer her this kind of support before. It was always just her, doing everything on her own, trying to make ends meet. But Richard's words, his sincerity, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could take a chance. She took a deep breath and looked up at him. "I'll think about it, Richard, I promise, but I'm scared. I don't know if I'm ready to change everything." Richard gave her a soft smile, one filled with understanding and patience. "That's okay, Clara. Change is scary for everyone. But sometimes you have to take that first step, even if it's small, and trust that the rest will follow." Clara nodded, her heart still heavy with doubt, but also filled with a strange sense of possibility. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she wasn't invisible, that her dreams and desires mattered. As Richard turned to leave, Clara watched him go, her mind still wrestling with the decision. But something had shifted within her. She no longer felt trapped in the life she had known. She had been given an opportunity, a chance to take control of her future, to build a life that wasn't defined by fear or limitation. For the first time, Clara realized that the decision wasn't just about Richard's offer. It was about her. It was about her finding the courage to believe in herself, to trust that she could create something better for herself and her son. The days following Richard's offer felt like a whirlwind for Clara. She couldn't remember the last time her thoughts had been so tangled, so overwhelming. Every moment seemed to pull her in different directions, each part tugging at the other. Her sense of responsibility, her fear of failure, and, in the midst of it all, the quiet hope that had started to grow within her. Clara had spent the next few days in a daze. She woke up early as usual, made breakfast for Emily and the other children, cleaned the house, and did everything that was expected of her. But her mind was never fully focused on the tasks at hand. It was always somewhere else, lost in the possibility of change. She hadn't spoken to Richard since that evening in the kitchen, but his words lingered, echoing in her thoughts. She couldn't stop thinking about the chance he had offered her, the opportunity to build a life for herself, to finally step out of the shadows of her job and become something more. But with that possibility came the fear of the unknown, the fear of stepping into a future that was uncertain, that was not guaranteed. The idea of leaving her old life behind was terrifying. Clara had always been a creature of habit, someone who took pride in the stability of her work. She had learned how to survive, how to make ends meet with whatever resources she had. She had never asked for anything more. But now, with Richard's offer in front of her, Clara was beginning to question everything. One afternoon, after she had finished cleaning the living room, Clara sat on the couch, her mind racing. She picked up the photo of her son, James, and stared at his face. The photo was worn, the edges curling slightly from years of handling, but his smile was still as bright as ever. He was her motivation, her reason for working so hard. She had sacrificed so much for him, and every decision she had ever made had been for his future. Clara had always dreamed of giving him a better life, one free from the struggles she had faced. But what if this was a chance to give him that life? What if, by taking Richard's offer, she could create a future where her son could thrive, where they both could escape the cycle of poverty and struggle? She had always put others before herself. She had always worked for others, cared for their needs, and met their demands. But now, as she sat there on the couch, Clara began to realize that she needed to start thinking about herself. For so long, she had been invisible, just another face in the background. But Richard had seen her. He had offered her a chance to take control of her future, to break free from the life that had held her down for so long. The idea of going back to school, of earning a degree, of finally achieving something for herself, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Clara didn't know where to begin, didn't know if she could even succeed. But what if she didn't try? What if she stayed in the same place, stuck in a life that had no future beyond the next paycheck? She stood up, her heart pounding. She couldn't let fear control her anymore. It was time to take a step into the unknown, to believe in herself, even if it meant risking failure. She had spent too many years putting her dreams aside. Now it was time to chase them. That evening, as the sun began to set, Clara went to Richard's office. Her heart raced as she approached the door. She wasn't sure what she was going to say, but she knew it was time to make a decision. She knocked softly, her breath catching in her throat. When Richard called out for her to enter, she pushed the door open, her mind set on one thing: to seize the opportunity he had given her. Richard looked up from his desk as she entered. His face softened when he saw her, his eyes filled with understanding. He could see the uncertainty in her posture, the hesitation in her eyes. But there was something else there too, something new, a spark. "Clara," he said gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "You've had some time to think." Clara nodded slowly, her hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of her dress. "Yes," she began, her voice quiet but determined. "I've been thinking about your offer. A lot. And I've realized that it's time for me to do something for myself. For my future." Richard's expression softened, a proud smile forming on his face. "I'm glad to hear that, Clara," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You deserve this. You've worked hard, and you've given so much. Now, it's time to invest in yourself." Clara took a deep breath, the weight of her decision still heavy on her shoulders. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm ready to take that step. I want to go back to school. I want to build a better life, not just for me, but for my son too." Richard's smile grew wider as he stood up and walked toward her. "You've made the right choice, Clara, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way. I'm proud of you for taking that step." Clara's eyes filled with tears as she felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own life. She wasn't just someone's maid anymore. She was someone who could build her own future, someone with dreams and hopes of her own. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady and encouraging. "You've earned it, Clara. Now go and make your dreams come true." Clara walked out of Richard's office, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where she was no longer invisible. A chapter where she could build a life filled with possibilities. The weeks following Clara's decision were filled with a new sense of purpose. She had enrolled in a local community college, started with evening classes that would allow her to continue working during the day. The first few days were overwhelming. New textbooks, a full class schedule, and the realization that this journey would not be easy. But Clara was determined. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was building something. And that something was her future. Richard had kept his word. He helped with the logistics, ensuring her tuition was paid for, providing transportation, and even offering her additional support when things got tough. But what mattered most to Clara was emotional support. He believed in her when she had trouble believing in herself. He reminded her that failure wasn't something to fear. It was a part of the process, something everyone had to face. And that made all the difference. At first, Clara struggled with balancing school, work, and caring for her son. There were days when she felt exhausted, her body aching from the long hours, and nights spent hunched over textbooks, trying to absorb everything she could. But there was a fire inside her that wouldn't allow her to quit. She had a dream now, and it was bigger than just getting by. It was about creating a life where she didn't have to worry every day about how to survive. Clara would come home after a long day at work, ready to collapse. But there was always a gleam of hope that kept her going. The hope that one day she could look back on all of this and know it had been worth it. She wasn't just changing her life. She was changing her son's life too. He would grow up knowing that nothing was impossible if you worked hard enough, if you never gave up, no matter how difficult the road ahead seemed. One evening, after Clara had come home from a particularly exhausting day of classes and work, Richard called her into his office. He had been watching her closely over the past few months, seeing the sacrifices she made, seeing how hard she was working. And he could see something else too, the spark of change in her, the determination that had started to grow in her heart. Clara entered the office, wiping her hands on her apron, unsure what this meeting was about. Richard looked up from the paperwork on his desk and smiled warmly at her. "Clara, I've been meaning to talk to you," Richard began. "I've seen how hard you've been working, how much effort you put into your studies and your job. I'm proud of you, and I think it's time for you to take the next step." Clara felt her heart race. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but she could sense that Richard had something important to say. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped together in front of him. "I know you're doing this for yourself and for your son, but I think it's time for you to start thinking about giving back. You've worked so hard, Clara, and I believe you have the potential to help others who are in the same situation you were once in. You've been given an incredible opportunity, and now it's time to help others who need it." Clara blinked, surprised by the direction of the conversation. She hadn't thought about giving back, not in the way Richard was suggesting. She had been so focused on her own journey that she hadn't considered how her success could help others. But as she listened to Richard, she began to realize that he was right. "You've always had such a strong work ethic," Richard continued, "and your story, your journey, can inspire others. I know there are many women out there who are struggling, just like you once were, and I think you could help them. You could be a beacon of hope for them." Clara was silent for a moment as she absorbed Richard's words. She had always kept her dreams to herself, never sharing them with anyone. But now, with the possibility of helping others in the same situation she'd been in, something clicked inside her. She could make a difference. She could help others who had been overlooked, just as she had once been. "I never thought about it like that," Clara said softly, "but I want to help. I want to show others that there's hope, that they can change their lives, too." Richard smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. You have the ability to do more than just change your own life, Clara. You have the power to help others do the same." You've been given a second chance, and now it's time to give back. In the month that followed, Clara took Richard's advice to heart. She began reaching out to other women in the community, those who were struggling to make ends meet, those who were working multiple jobs and still living paycheck to paycheck. She shared her story with them about how she had been able to go back to school, how she had taken control of her future, and how they, too, could do the same. Clara didn't just talk about change. She embodied it. She volunteered at local shelters, offering support and guidance to women who were trying to get back on their feet. She helped them navigate the resources available to them, giving them the tools they needed to break free from the cycle of poverty and struggle. It wasn't easy and it took time, but slowly, Clara began to see the impact she was having. Women who had once felt hopeless were now looking to her for inspiration. They were seeing that it was possible to change their lives, just as Clara had done, and that gave them hope. Through it all, Clara remained grounded. She never lost sight of why she was doing this, why she had worked so hard to get to this point. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It was about making a difference, about leaving a legacy that would inspire others long after she was gone. One afternoon, as Clara was helping a woman at the shelter fill out a job application, she was approached by a young girl who had been listening to their conversation. The girl's eyes were wide with admiration, and her voice was trembling with excitement. "You're Clara, right?" she asked shyly. Clara looked down at the girl, who couldn't have been older than 16. "Yes, I am," she said with a warm smile. "How can I help you?" "I just wanted to thank you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard your story, and it gives me hope. I don't know what the future holds for me, but because of you, I know that anything is possible." Clara's heart swelled with pride as she looked at the girl. She had come full circle. She had started as a woman with no hope, no direction, and now she was standing here, helping others find their way. That moment, more than anything, reminded Clara why she had made the decision to change her life. It wasn't just for herself. It was for the generations of women who would follow in her footsteps. It was for the young girls who needed to see that their circumstances didn't define their future. Clara's efforts began to gain momentum as she continued to build her network of support and help those in need. What started as a simple act of kindness, offering advice and mentorship to the women she met, grew into something much larger than she could have imagined. Word spread quickly in her community about the woman who had turned her life around and was now helping others do the same. Her story became an inspiration, a symbol of hope for those who felt trapped in their circumstances. The first time Clara realized the full impact of her work was when she received a call from a local women's shelter. The shelter had been running a program for women who had faced abuse, neglect, or poverty. They had heard Clara speak at a community meeting about her journey, and they were interested in partnering with her to offer workshops that would empower other women to make changes in their own lives. Clara was overwhelmed with the offer. She had never imagined that her story could inspire such a movement. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this was her calling. She wasn't just changing her own life. She was becoming a catalyst for change in her community. The first workshop she led was small, just a handful of women who had come to the shelter for help. Clara shared her journey with them, how she had worked as a maid, how she had faced hardships, and how Richard had given her the opportunity to change her life. She spoke from the heart, not holding back any of the struggles or fears she had faced. She knew that if she could make them understand one thing, it would be that their circumstances didn't define them. They had the power to change, to take control of their future. As Clara spoke, she could see the women in the room nodding and understanding. Some of them had tears in their eyes, while others were sitting on the edge of their seats, hanging on her every word. They saw themselves in Clara. They saw the possibility of a life beyond their current struggles. And that was all they needed to begin their own journey of transformation. The workshop was a turning point for Clara. She realized that she had been given a gift not just education, but of empowerment. The knowledge she had gained, the lessons she had learned, could be used to help others. She could be the bridge between despair and hope for so many women. And this realization drove her forward, fueling her desire to do even more. As Clara continued to work with the shelter and other community organizations, her reach grew. She started to speak at local schools, talking to young girls about the power of education, the importance of self-worth, and the possibilities that lay ahead of them. She visited prisons and rehabilitation centers, where she spoke to women who had lost their way and were looking for a second chance. Everywhere she went, she was met with the same response. Women who had been overlooked, abandoned, and ignored were now finding their voices. They were finding the strength to believe in themselves, to rise above their circumstances, and take control of their futures. And with every person she helped, the ripple effect grew. The women Clara mentored began to pass on the message to others. They started their own businesses, went back to school, and began advocating for change in their own communities. The impact of Clara's work was spreading beyond anything she could have imagined. But Clara didn't stop there. She continued to push forward, always thinking about the next step. She had started with small acts of kindness, but now she was creating lasting change. One afternoon, she met with a group of local business leaders to discuss creating a scholarship fund for young women who wanted to pursue higher education. They were so inspired by Clara's story that they agreed to help fund the initiative, creating a scholarship program that would provide financial assistance to women in the community who wanted to further their education but didn't have the means to do so. Clara's heart swelled with pride as she stood before the group of business leaders. This wasn't just her victory. This was the victory of every woman she had helped, every woman who had supported her along the way. Together, they were creating a network of empowerment that would uplift generations to come. But it wasn't just the women she had mentored who had changed. Clara's own life had transformed in ways she never thought possible. The woman who had once been an invisible maid in the background of someone else's life was now standing at the forefront of change. She had built something of her own, a legacy of compassion, hope, and transformation. Clara had always dreamed of giving her son, James, a better life. She had worked tirelessly for him, and now, with the success she had achieved, she could give him that future. James, who had once seen his mother struggling, now saw her as a role model. He was proud of her, and as he grew older, he began to understand the sacrifices she had made for him and the way she had fought for a better life for them both. One afternoon, as Clara was walking to the local park, she saw a group of young girls sitting together, talking excitedly. They were looking at something in their hands, and as Clara got closer, she saw that they were reading a book. It was a book she had written, a book about her journey, her struggles, and the lessons she had learned along the way. The book, which she had published to share her story and inspire others, had become a symbol of hope for the younger generation. As she approached the girls, one of them looked up and smiled. "You're Clara, right?" she asked shyly. Clara smiled, nodding. "Yes, that's me. We're reading your book," the girl said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's amazing. You've given us hope. We never thought we could be more than what we are, but after reading your story, we know that anything is possible." Tears filled Clara's eyes as she looked at the group of girls, their faces shining with hope and determination. She had never imagined that her story would inspire so many people. But now, as she stood there, watching the ripple effect of her work spread far beyond what she could have hoped for, Clara realized that she had done more than change her own life. She had changed the lives of so many others. And that was a legacy she had built. A legacy of hope, empowerment, and love. It had been a few years since Clara made the life-changing decision to go back to school, and what a journey it had been. The road had been long and difficult, filled with moments of self-doubt and struggle, but she had pushed through every obstacle that had come her way. Today, as Clara sat in the audience at the local college graduation ceremony, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had walked across the stage earlier that day, receiving her degree in social work, a field that felt like a natural fit for her. She had always wanted to make a difference, to help others, and now, armed with both education and experience, Clara felt ready to take on the world. The young woman who had once scrubbed floors and cleaned other people's homes was now a college graduate, standing shoulder to shoulder with others who had once been in her shoes. It had taken everything in her to get to this point. Late nights studying, balancing work and school, and the constant pressure of being a mother, a student, and an employee. It had all been overwhelming at times. But every sacrifice, every tear, and every moment of exhaustion had been worth it. Clara had proven to herself that she could accomplish whatever she set her mind to. But what made it even more fulfilling was that she had not done it alone. Richard had been by her side every step of the way, supporting her, encouraging her, and believing in her when she couldn't believe in herself. Clara had always been grateful for Richard's help, but today, as she sat in the crowd surrounded by fellow graduates, she realized that her journey had not been just about her success. It had been about everything that had come with it. The lives she had touched, the women she had mentored, and the impact she had made in her community. She wasn't just an employee anymore. She was a symbol of change, a beacon of hope for those who had once felt invisible, just like she had. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Clara found herself surrounded by a group of women she had worked with over the years. These women, some of whom she had mentored, others who had been part of her community outreach programs, were there to congratulate her. They had all seen Clara's journey from the very beginning. From the day she had walked into that office with Richard and made a decision to change her life. One woman, Lisa, who had been a part of the first mentorship group Clara had started, stepped forward. "You did it, Clara. You really did it." Clara smiled, feeling a rush of emotion wash over her. It was one thing to achieve something for herself, but to see the impact of her journey on the lives of others made everything so much more meaningful. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You all inspire me as much as I hope I've inspired you. Together, we've built something that will last. And that's what matters most." Lisa smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've changed all of our lives, Clara. You've shown us that we can be more than we thought we were. You've given us the courage to dream, to believe in ourselves." Clara's heart swelled with pride. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. These were the moments that confirmed that her decision to change her life had been the right one, not just for her, but for the people around her. Later that evening, as Clara sat alone in her small apartment, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The quietness of the room was a stark contrast to the bustle of the day, but it gave her a sense of peace. She thought about how far she had come, from the woman who had scrubbed floors in Richard's mansion to the woman who now held a degree in social work. She thought about James, her son, and how proud he must be of her. She thought about the women she had helped, the women who had looked to her for guidance and hope. And she thought about Richard, how much he had changed her life, and how much she had changed his. The two of them had come full circle. Richard, the wealthy businessman who had once been so distant and disconnected, had found a new purpose through the support of Clara. He had watched her grow, and in doing so, he had learned the true value of human connection. Richard had become a philanthropist, dedicating his resources to causes that mattered, causes that aligned with Clara's values of empowerment and equality. But it wasn't just Richard who had changed. Clara had transformed too. She had stepped into her own power, finding the courage to pursue her dreams and, in turn, helping others pursue theirs. She had become a woman who believed in herself, who no longer saw herself as invisible. She had created a ripple effect that had touched so many lives, and she wasn't done yet. Clara's phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and smiled as she saw Richard's name. She had come to rely on these small moments of connection, the simple check-ins, the words of encouragement that had meant so much over the years. "How's the graduation?" Richard texted. "I know you did it. I'm so proud of you." Clara smiled, her fingers quickly typing her response. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. But I have to say, it feels pretty incredible to look back and see how far I've come." Richard's reply came quickly. "I think it's time to start thinking about the next chapter. You've done so much already, but I believe you have even more to give. You've only just begun." Clara sat back, the weight of Richard's words sinking in. It was true. She had accomplished so much, but there was still so much more to do. The work wasn't over. There were more women to help, more stories to tell, and more lives to change. As Clara looked out the window at the bustling city below, she realized that her journey was far from finished. She had reached one milestone, but there was an entire future ahead of her, and she was ready to face it, armed with the belief that anything was possible as she continued to work hard, remain true to herself, and most importantly, never stop believing in the power of change. The sun had just begun to set, casting a warm glow over the city. Clara stood by the window of her modest apartment, watching the people below, each one lost in their own lives. To the world, these people were just faces in the crowd, but to Clara, they represented something more. They represented the future, the countless stories of struggle and hope that were still waiting to unfold. It had been a long journey, and Clara had learned more about herself than she could have ever imagined. When she had first started working for Richard, she had been invisible, just another maid in a mansion filled with wealth and power. But now, after years of hard work, determination, and sacrifice, she had become a woman who knew her worth. She had stepped into her power, and in doing so, she had helped others do the same. Clara's life was no longer defined by the title of maid. She had built a career, a network of support, and a life full of purpose. She had become a mentor, an advocate, and a source of hope for women in her community who had once been in her shoes. But despite all her success, there was still one question that lingered in her mind. What now? Clara had spent so many years working to change her life, working to make a better future for her son, James, and for the women she helped along the way. But now, as she stood in her apartment, she realized that the work was never truly finished. There would always be more women to help, more lives to change, more ways to give back. And that was a lesson Clara had learned above all else. True success was not just about achieving personal goals. It was about making a lasting difference in the lives of others. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. She picked it up to find a text from Richard. Clara, I've been thinking. You've made such an incredible impact already, but I believe you have the potential to do even more. I'm working on a new initiative, something that could really change the lives of women in our community. I'd like to discuss it with you when you have time. Clara smiled as she read the message. Richard had always believed in her, even when she hadn't believed in herself. He had given her a chance, and now, together, they were making a real difference. She had never imagined that her journey would take her here, to this point where she could actually create change on such a large scale. She quickly typed a reply. I'm ready, Richard. Let's talk. As she hit send, Clara felt a sense of excitement bubbling inside her. This was the next chapter, the one that would take everything she had learned and use it to help even more women. Richard was right. She had only just begun. A few days later, Clara met Richard at a local community center, a place where they often held workshops and events for women. The center had become a hub for empowerment, a space where women could learn, grow, and support one another. Richard greeted Clara with a warm smile, his face lighting up as he saw her walk in. You're just in time, Richard said, leading her to a small conference room where a group of women were already gathered. Clara felt a sense of purpose wash over her as she took her seat at the table. These women were here for the same reason she had once been. They were ready to change their lives. Richard began by introducing a new initiative, an outreach program that would provide scholarships, job training, and mentorship to women in need. It was a comprehensive program designed to break the cycle of poverty and give women the tools they needed to succeed. Clara's role in the program would be to lead the mentorship portion, helping women build confidence, set goals, and navigate the challenges they faced. Clara was overwhelmed by the scope of the project. It was bigger than anything she had ever done before, but she knew it was the right next step. She had been given so much, and now it was time to give back on a larger scale. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the chance to reach even more women and show them that they could change their lives, just as she had. As the meeting went on, Clara felt the weight of the responsibilities settle on her shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt right. This was her calling. This was why she had gone through everything she had. Her journey had not just been about personal success. It had been about preparing her to help others do the same. By the end of the meeting, Clara was filled with a sense of purpose she had never known before. This initiative would be the culmination of everything she had worked for, the chance to help women break free from the same struggles she had faced. She was no longer just someone who had overcome adversity. She was a mentor, a guide, a leader, and now she had the chance to lead others to success. The next few months were a whirlwind. The initiative took off faster than anyone had expected. with dozens of women enrolling in the program and taking part in workshops and training sessions. Clara's mentorship program became the heart of the initiative, a space where women could come together, share their experiences, and support one another. It wasn't just about career training or education. It was about building self-worth, learning to trust themselves, and realizing that they, too, had the power to change their futures. As Clara watched the women around her grow, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had helped create something that would outlast her, something that would continue to change lives long after she was gone. And, most importantly, she had learned the true meaning of success. It wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about personal achievements or accolades. True success was about helping others rise, lifting them up when they couldn't stand on their own, and giving them the tools they needed to build a better life. Clara's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the message. It was from James, her son, who was now in high school. He had always been her source of inspiration, the reason she had worked so hard for so long. The message was simple, but it filled Clara's heart with pride. "Mom, I'm really proud of you. You've done so much for us, and now I see you helping other people. You're my hero." Clara wiped away a tear as she read the message. She had spent so many years trying to create a better life for James, and now she was seeing the fruit of her labor. Her son had grown up with a different understanding of the world. A world where anything was possible, as long as you believed in yourself and never gave up. As Clara sat back in her chair, looking out at the group of women in the workshop, she realized that her story was no longer just hers. It belonged to all the women she had helped, all the women who had walked through the doors of the community center looking for a chance, for hope. And in that moment, Clara knew that she had made a difference. She had found her purpose. Thank you so much for watching. We truly appreciate your time and support. If you enjoyed the video, please give a thumbs up, and don't forget to leave a meaningful comment below. Let us know your thoughts, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. It means a lot to us to hear from you. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more amazing content like this. And to all our returning subscribers, thank you for your continued support. We couldn't do this without you. Stay tuned for more exciting videos coming your way, and we'll see you in the next one.